The purpose of this recording is to provide an overview of the consequences of excessive noise exposure. Discussion topics include hearing loss, noise, hearing loss from occupational and non-occupational noise, communication interference, and job performance. Noise is one of the most pervasive of all occupational hazards, and dealing with its effects on hearing go back to the beginnings of the Industrial Revolution. Initially labeled Boilermaker's disease for its prevalence in workers fabricating steam boilers, noise-induced hearing loss, NIHL, has often been considered an inevitable consequence of a noisy job. Although noise-induced hearing loss is so common, in its early stages, it is often under-recognized because in most cases, there are no visible effects like bleeding or pain. Often there is only a gradual progressive loss. The effects may initially be noticed only by family and friends, but unless halted, may lead to problems maintaining safety on the job and even a loss of sensitivity to environmental sounds. Unfortunately, good hearing is usually taken for granted until it is significantly impaired. Hearing loss may be so gradual that individuals often do not recognize it until the impairment is handicapping. As the hearing loss worsens, the individual tends to withdraw from social situations. Events such as church services, parties, and movies are no longer as enjoyable. The loud volume on the TV often becomes a source of contention. Family members may find it difficult to stay in the room. One of the most serious and yet least talked about consequences of hearing impairment is the reduction in the degree of intimacy among family members. When hearing worsens or becomes more difficult for spouses and family members to be understood, communication becomes less personal and the relationship less satisfying, and loneliness and isolation creep in. Unlike many other occupational illnesses, the auditory effects of noise are well documented, and there is little controversy over the amount of continuous noise that causes different degrees of hearing loss. Periods of noise interrupted by periods of quiet can allow the ear to recover and therefore be somewhat less hazardous than continuous noise. However, this intermittent noise also causes hearing loss. Hearing damage from impulsive noise depends mainly on the level and duration of the impulse, and it may be worse if other types of noise are in the background. Noise-induced hearing loss is often temporary at first. During a noisy day, the ear becomes fatigued and the worker experiences a reduction in hearing known as a temporary threshold shift, or TTS. Between the end of the work shift and the beginning of the next, the ear may have time to recover from much of the TTS if given sufficient auditory rest. As evidence of this, workers often say that the next morning, when they start the car, the radio is blaring. This certainly would indicate that they did not hear as well during the drive home from work the night before. After days, months, or years of exposure, the TTS becomes a permanent threshold shift, or PTS. Research has shown that several industrial agents are ototoxic or toxic or poisonous to the ear. They can be especially problematic when exposures occur in combination with noise. These agents, which include heavy metals, organic solvents, and asphyxiants like carbon monoxide, can increase the damaging potential of noise. Evidence also suggests that certain drugs that are already toxic to the ear can compound the damaging effects of noise. Examples include certain antibiotics, medications that treat erectile dysfunction, and chemotherapy drugs. Occupational noise is not the only cause of noise-induced hearing loss among workers. Non-occupational or recreational sources of noise exposure must also be considered. These sources produce what some noise professionals call socioacusis, and their effects on hearing loss are virtually indistinguishable from occupational noise-induced hearing loss. Their existence can be surmised only by asking detailed questions about any noisy non-work activities. Frequent shooting without wearing hearing protection can be a significant contributor to noise-induced hearing loss. A few other common examples of sources of socioacusis include woodworking tools, chainsaws, unmuffed motorcycles, and loud music. The fact that noise can interfere with or mask speech communication, warning signs, and other desirable auditory information is only common sense. Many industrial processes can be performed very well with a minimum of communication among workers. However, jobs such as those performed by airline pilots, railroad engineers, military specialists, and many others rely heavily on a clear understanding of speech. Some workers even use sophisticated systems with devices that can cancel some of the unwanted noise to facilitate communication. In many cases, however, workers just must make do, straining to understand speech above the noise and shouting above it or manually signaling. Some people experience hoarseness, vocal nodules, or other abnormalities of the vocal cords from excessive strain. Acoustical specialists have developed methods that depend on various characteristics of the noise and the distance between talker and listener to predict the degree of communication difficulty that can occur in industrial situations under a variety of conditions. Noise can also interfere with safety. Studies have also implicated noise and hearing loss in a large percentage of injuries among shipyard and agricultural workers and jobs such as equipment operation and labor. To prevent communication breakdowns in noisy environments, some processes use backup systems like visual warning devices. Another problem recognized more by noise exposed workers than by hearing conservation professionals is that hearing protection devices may interfere with the perception of speech and warning signals. This appears to be true, especially when the user already has a hearing loss. Noise usually has little effect on the performance of repetitive, monotonous work, and in some cases can increase job performance if the noise is low or moderate. However, high levels of noise can degrade job performance, especially when the task is complicated or involves doing more than one thing at a time. Intermittent noise tends to be more disruptive than continuous noise, particularly when the periods of noise are unpredictable and uncontrollable. Interestingly, recent research indicates that people are less likely to help each other and more likely to exhibit antisocial behavior in noisy environments than quiet ones. Workers may also feel annoyed or irritated by the noise of their workplace. After a period of adjustment, most workers do not appear to be bothered as much, but they may still complain of fatigue, irritability, and sleeplessness. In summary, hearing loss is gradual and becomes a problem when the exchange of ideas or communication becomes difficult. Noise can be classified in two main categories. Noise and chemical agents can damage the hearing mechanism. Hearing loss can interfere with communication and job performance. Later.